naturalist and a longtime member of the Native Plant Society of Texas, and she co-administers the Texas Native Bee Co-op Facebook page and chairs the Bring Back the Monarchs for Texas Committee with the Native Plant Society of Texas. And I have seen several of her training sessions on learning to be a trainer about monarch propagation and, sorry, not propagation, planning and successful migrations from the monarch. So she is a wealth of information, and we're really excited to have her with us this evening. And Carol, I will hand it over to you to start your presentation.
Okay, well, I think I've got it all queued up. And so I'm going to ask one person to let me know what you see. Is it showing?
Yes.
Okay.
It looks good.
All right. So if you've been following the news, or if you've looked out your front door, you probably know that Texas is in a state of serious drought right now. That might not even be the technical word. There might be one worse than serious that actually applies meteorologically, but it's pretty bad. I took a drive on Saturday and found that much of the landscape I was looking at was crispy and dry, very scary. So it's going to be up to individual gardeners to keep little patches green and blooming for monarchs this year as they come through on their fall migration. And I think it's more critical than possibly ever this year, where we're expecting a small population and a great difficulty crossing parched Texas if things don't improve very quickly. But the good news is that small spaces make a big difference for small creatures, and connected small spaces make an even bigger difference. So if you do your part, get your neighbors to do a little bit too, hopefully they will make it across the state. Okay, so let's see if I can get this to advance. We're going to be looking at the Monarch Way Station concept tonight, and we have a program in 4 parts, so we're going to take questions between the parts as best we can. But a Monarch Way Station could look like this. This is Monarch Way Station number 1 at University of Kansas in Kansas. And it's very simply, we want to know what it is and why do we care? It is very simply a place that provides everything a monarch butterfly needs to complete its life cycle, from host plants for the caterpillars to munch, nectar plants to feed those nectar sipping adults that don't have chewy mouth parts, and then shelter for monarch butterflies so that they can actually escape the rain, the hail. Someday we'll see rain again, I think. And then Monarch Way Stations that meet certain easy criteria can be registered with Monarch Watch at monarchwatch.org. That's optional. You can still do lots of good without registering your way station. But if you do, it starts to become a movement where other people want to do this too. They can see your dot on the map and they can say, gee, maybe I want to do that too. Right now, there are over 40,000 registered way stations, and Texas leads the way. Texans are pretty awesome. And I'd just like to see us keep leading the way. This map is a little bit outdated. There are now over 40,000. So all Monarch Way Stations need just 3 things. They need nectar plants for adults. And honestly, nectar plants that are native plants are the very best thing you can do for monarchs. The less adapted and changed they are from their true native run-of-the-mill form, the better they are for monarchs. We know that they evolved with the nectar supplies that are in these plants. And when growers get hold of these and they start changing them to have double petals, larger flowers, different colors that aren't really what you'd find in the wild, then sometimes nectar production really suffers. So native plants are your best bet. Milkweeds for caterpillars to eat are absolutely essential. And I know there was a blog post out recently from a researcher that said, don't plant milkweed, we don't need milkweed. I heartily disagree. Many of our urban landscapes are pretty much devoid of milkweeds, and monarchs have to cross those landscapes to get through Texas. So I do say we don't have enough, and that's my position on that. They need shelter for adults, and that can be any kind of shrubbery that they can climb into. They are here in the spring and they're here in the fall, not so much the summer and not so much the winter. So we don't have to worry about the dead of summer and the dead of winter so much, just the spring and the fall while they're migrating. Now, supplemental water is something that they recommend for bird landscapes quite often, and that's a nice thing to have. But monarchs really don't drink a lot of water while they are in Texas. They actually drink water during the winter at the overwintering grounds to convert body fat stores to energy. Here, they get all the liquids they need from the nectar that they're drinking. If you have your microphone open, please just double check and turn that off. Okay, so let's see what's next. Monarch way stations can be really rather small. They can be modular or they can be huge. This one is a modular monarch way station, not all native plants, but it's really in a cool location. This one is at a juvenile detention center. And the people being detained there, these youngsters, are taken out for gardening lessons. So they're learning valuable life skills, which might be marketable when they get out. They are learning to care for living things, which I think is terribly important for children, especially troubled children. And they're learning how to support monarch butterflies with this project from the master gardeners. But you can see they don't have one huge way station. They have these little modules that they've added little by little. This is my monarch way station, and it's called a colossal monarch way station. It's not small, medium, or large, it's colossal. And it's 37 acres near the Red River. This goldenrod is just beginning to bloom at this time of year and blooms at just the right time for the monarchs to come through, along with a lot of other plants in a year that's not so dry. So large or small, it doesn't matter. If you don't have space of your own, consider using other people's spaces. Look at all of those places. I'm just going to give you a second to scan that slide. There's really no limit to where you could put a monarch way station. You just need space and some workers to maintain it. NPSOT has some great monarch way stations in the hill country at 4 highway rest stops on I-35. So rest stops would be an interesting place to put them. This is one of my favorite monarch way stations. This is actually a suburban front yard in Plano, Texas. And Plano, Texas is as uptight about their front yard maintenance and appearance as any place on earth. And he managed to convince his neighbors that this was going to be okay, put in this prairie garden as a front yard instead of a lawn, and just look at what that is doing. This looks like a fall migration shot to me. This man's name is Michael McDowell, and if you would like to read his blog, it's called Plano Blue Stem. My front yard has been converted to a prairie garden. I saw what Michael did. I thought I could do that. One day I was out speaking to a class of high schoolers, and it was an all-day gig. It was exhausting. It was a little demoralizing. And at the end of the day, the teacher said, I don't know if anything I say or do ever makes a difference sometimes. And I thought, oh, great. Now I'm not only tired, I am also depressed. And I drove home in a blue funk, and I thought, I don't know if anything I say or do makes a difference in this world. But as I pulled up to the curb, there in my tiny postage stamp of a suburban front yard, my goldenrod was in bloom, and there were 13 monarchs getting ready to bed down for the night. So yes, what you do in a small space can provide valuable lifelines for these monarchs trying to cross what looks like a desert right now. So what's so special about Texas? Why is it all up to Texans to get this right? Well, the entire population of monarchs east of the Rocky Mountains depends on finding milkweeds and nectar plants when they migrate through Texas. The milkweeds are for the spring migration. That's where they lay their eggs. The nectar plants are needed on both legs of the trip, going north and going south. That story begins down there on the blue dot in Mexico, high in the mountains of Mexico, in special areas where the climate is exactly right. Monarchs hang, sort of resting for the winter, using as little energy as possible. After they're done with this overwintering, they and the days get longer and start to warm up, they get restless and they begin to move north. You can see the green arrows on this migration map, and those arrows indicate roughly where the monarchs move on their way through Texas in the spring. They're going to get a couple hundred miles into Texas before they find significant quantities of milkweed to really lay a lot of eggs. And that mother monarch is going to fly north and lay eggs as she goes. The first big band of monarch eggs is going to occur in the hill country. They look like this, tiny little football shapes with ridges to help them expand. And in just a couple of days, those eggs are ready to hatch. So here is one that's about ready to hatch. It's turned head up inside its egg, and you can see that black spot at the top. That means it's just about out. And then one that has just hatched. The first thing they'll do is turn around and eat their eggshell, because they don't even have jaws big enough to really munch on the leaves yet. They'll have to dine and kind of graze on the fuzz on the back of that leaf. But after 2 days, they've developed enough and grown enough to be the size roughly of an eye on the back of a US dime. Okay, these are 2 days old, and at this point, they are able to make little holes in the leaves. Here they are growing and growing, eating and pooping. That's pretty much all they do. And within about 12 days, they're full size as caterpillars, about the size of my pinky finger. At that point, they're going to crawl off their host plants and find a place to spin a little silk pad and hang from that. They're going to hang in a J position for about 24 hours. And at that point, they're completing some work inside that skin, getting ready to shed their stripy suit for the last time. They've already shed it several times as caterpillars. Underneath that last skin is the soft chrysalis. So here it is in a stage that most people don't see. This is only about 20 minutes worth of their lifespan. While it's still soft, it's still stretched out, but you can kind of see some of the adult parts in this soft chrysalis stage. Within about 20 minutes, that chrysalis has drawn up and formed the shape that we're more familiar with and begun to harden. These are heavy. They're really dense for their size. They feel like a jade item. And I frequently have people ask me, where did you get that jewelry, when they see a live chrysalis at an outdoor event? Within another 2 weeks, usually a little less, that chrysalis will turn suddenly clear, and you'll be able to view the adult monarch inside. It's still rather folded up, might not look quite right. When it's ready to emerge, it always comes out the same way, and the wings will be all kind of crumpled. Doesn't look great. The abdomen will be rather large. It still has a lot of excess fluid in the abdomen. It's going to stretch out those wings using hydraulic pressure, and it will eject excess fluids before it is ready to assume life as a full-fledged adult. It takes a while for the wings to harden and some last adult pieces to be fully functional before they want to fly away and begin to eat and to mate. So that all happens about your location in Central Texas. After this adult is emerged as an adult in the spring, it's going to fly north. This is a male, so it's going to seek a mate, and the females are going to lay eggs, lay eggs, lay eggs as they journey north. Going to have a lot more eggs laid in North Texas. And by the second new generation of each spring, the monarchs will have spread out all through the yellow portions on this map east of the Rocky Mountains. So that second generation makes it all the way up to Canada, the second new generation. And all along, they've been laying eggs wherever they could find milkweed. If Texas doesn't have milkweeds when they come through in the spring, monarchs can't lay eggs, there won't be caterpillars, there won't be adults, and this breeding chain is broken. So at the end of the summer, let me go back one slide. They're up there in Canada, all these yellow parts here in the north, and they are ready to head back south. The last generation of the summer is born larger, darker on average, and their wing structure is just slightly different. Those wings are optimized for long distance flight, and their task is to migrate all the way through Texas back to Mexico, where they overwinter and begin the cycle again. So here they are on their way through North Texas. This is a nighttime roost in Lewisville, Texas, near Lake Lewisville. And I was lucky enough to just be there early one morning in October when they were coming through, and we rounded the bend near a marsh, and all of a sudden there were a little flutterings, a monarch here and there. And as we continued to round that bend, all of a sudden we were in an area where there were hundreds and hundreds of monarchs roosting for the night. So it's a lucky thing to see a roost. We don't always get to do that, but it's a real treat. As you get closer and closer to Mexico, monarchs are concentrated in that funnel that we saw going back south. And they are going to, at times, appear quite numerous as they get close to their destination in Mexico. Here they are in the overwintering sites where they coat the trees really thickly in small areas. And they can be so thick that they almost replace the needles in this case, because this is a conifer, and they look like leaves hanging from the trees. These two photos aren't mine. I haven't been to the overwintering sites, but this is a tree trunk that's completely encrusted with monarchs at the overwintering site. There are so many mysteries about how this migration actually works in detail. It would be a horrible thing if we lost the monarch migration before we even understood how it worked. When spring rolls around again, the monarchs are ready to move north, complete that life cycle all over again, migrating and breeding. And when they get to North Texas, if they've been through that southbound migration, winter in Mexico, and have gotten all the way back up here, they look like this. They're faded, they're ragged, they look like they've been through the wars. And there's a good reason for that. It's a very arduous journey. And so, yes, it is hard on them. Remember, monarchs only weigh about as much as a standard paperclip. And so this is a journey of over 3,000 miles that they might be making. How can you help monarchs in your own spaces? Well, first, reduce or eliminate, preferably eliminate, personal pesticide use. Do you really need to use it? Do you really need to use as much as you're using? Most pesticides are not species specific and harm a lot of our butterflies and our native bees. Refrain from mowing milkweeds in the spring. By the 30th of May, most monarchs have left Texas in the spring. If they're still here, they kind of get to be wasted generations that don't contribute all that much to the migratory monarchs. And the reason is they don't breed effectively in hot weather, and their parasites like wasps that will prey on them really do increase in the hot weather. So we don't get that many monarchs out of the summer monarchs that are staying. Plant real nectar plants for spring migration. And again, that would be things with simple centers and standard native plants that haven't been changed much. Plant native milkweeds. I'm going to ask you, please don't plant the tropical milkweeds. And plant real nectar plants for the fall migration when those adults need to fuel up. They actually gain weight on their way back to Mexico, and they can't do that if there aren't any plants blooming for nectar. Tell others that monarchs need milkweeds, and then create and register your monarch way station. The signs are optional. You can purchase a sign to display, so that's passive education for your neighbors as well. So monarchs do need milkweeds, and we're going to look at some milkweeds next, but I'm going to pause here for just a couple of questions. Is somebody monitoring the chat for questions? If so, I can't hear you.
Hey, Carol, I'm looking at it, and this is Meg, and I don't see any specific questions about that section of your presentation. I think you just did such a marvelous job. We all feel like we know everything now.
or I talk so fast you couldn't have time to type. Okay, so I'm going to talk fast.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Yes, Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah. Do you say it's okay to mow after May?
Yes.
I'm trying to convince my brother never to mow, but
Oh, okay. Well, it depends on your goals. Most monarchs are done and out of Texas. They stop flying north about the 7th through 11th of June. And so if they stop flying north, they're stuck here for the summer. They're kind of a lost generation.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're pretty much out of here by the end of May.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, bumblebees aren't, so that's a whole different story.
Excuse me, but if you mow them, they don't go to seed and make more babies.
That is true. So you can't optimize for everything simultaneously, but if you have a hay field that must be mowed for hay because that is your business, if you can hold off till the end of May, you've at least missed most of the monarchs.
Now, this is just vacant land. I mean, it's just cattle ranch. So
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'll carry on.
One other comment. If
Okay.
you haven't gone to Mexico and seen the whatever it is,
Biosphere reserves, they're wonderful.
they're wonderful. They are. It's an absolutely wonderful trip.
Yeah. I'm
Really
torn
recommend.
between wanting to see it and not wanting to leave footprints there, you know. So, but they do depend on tourism, ecotourism for the local economy. So that helps them keep the monarchs and preserve them as well.
Well, it hasn't been safe there in the last few years, so I was.
Well, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to do that tonight.
Right.
So,
Okay.
okay. So the bottom line is monarchs do need milkweeds. And if you're living in a region where there's been a big influx of people, we need to be replacing these out on our landscapes. This is a green milkweed, and here's a monarch caterpillar who hasn't been too particular about sticking to the leaves. So it's been eating the actual flowers of the milkweed. You're going to find the eggs under the leaves, on top of the leaves, and down inside the flower heads as well. They will eat the pods, they will eat the leaves, they will eat the stems if they really have to, but that's not their preference. And the chemicals in the milkweeds impart a safety factor to the monarchs. It makes them taste bad, and they're a little toxic to predators. So most things won't eat them. We're going to look at some specific milkweeds. This is not the first milkweed on my list. This one is green milkweed, Asclepias viridis. Viridis literally means green, and you're going to find this called green antelope horns. But I'm begging you, leave out the antelope horns on this and just call it green, because there is another milkweed that's better off called antelope horns. And as soon as we stick that in there, people drop the green and then they're confused about which milkweed they're actually seeing. Here it is close up, this monarch. It was nectaring, and there's a honeybee that's come along to join in too. All of these milkweeds supply excellent nectar for other butterflies and for lots of bees, both honeybees and native bees. And that one, by the way, is growing in my garden right next to the sidewalk. You almost have to chase the butterflies off to get a picture. A bunch of hair streaks, and these are only the ones that didn't leave as I approached this plant up on my refuge. As they finish blooming, they will begin to set seed pods. And you can see why antelope horns has been applied to several milkweeds, because these pods have the look of a pair of horns sticking up. But this is still the green milkweed. Once the pods are ripe, they will split open and release their seeds on the wind. And those seeds each have a fluffy parachute equipped like that to carry them far away from the parent plant. This is a seed dispersal mechanism that means that the milkweeds aren't going to be competing with each other so much. The clean seeds with their fluff removed look like this. And the roots of these first 4 species I'm going to show you are all heavy tap roots. They look like sweet potatoes. They can be 18 inches long. And these are storage organs that store carbohydrates and moisture. So this plant can endure a lot of abuse and then still resprout. It's going to store water when it can and use it when it has to. All of our native milkweeds go dormant in response to 3 cues: excessive heat, excessive drought, or excessive cold. And so these tap roots give them that ability to resprout when the conditions improve. Here it is blooming about the same time as the paintbrush in North Texas. Here's that one that was on the cover slide. It's antelope horns milkweed, and I have no idea how the picture got off center. Things just happen when I'm not looking, I guess. It has lance-shaped leaves, not so much oval. It has a sprawling habit compared to the green milkweed, and it prefers a much better drained soil. Green is kind of flexible in its water requirements. It can live in a drainage ditch and it can live in your cracked chalk. The antelope horns is going to die if it's in your drainage ditch that floods quite a bit. It would prefer to be dry, especially over the winter. You will find it growing right out of cracked chalk. It has little starfish pillow-shaped buds, which I think are just adorable. These little flattened star-shaped buds. And they open into marvelous flowers with lots of pentagons and stars, 5 parts for everything associated with this flower. Those little white things that stick out like arms are called hoods, and all milkweeds have some kind of hoods. In the antelope horns, they go all the way out to the edge of the petals. Antelope horns, Asclepias spirula, forms these nice, neat seed or flower heads. They almost look tessellated because of how well those flowers fit together. And this is really pretty much a spherical seed flower head. I keep saying seed when I mean to say flowers. Sorry about that. So they're quite beautiful, and I would think anybody would want one of these in their landscape. I have seen these with as many as 27 flower heads on them all at once. This is one flower head, and it's about the size of a softball. Butterfly weed is another plant that's native to Texas. It's very frequently confused with the non-native tropical milkweed. It is naturally a bright orange, but it can range from yellow through red, all naturally occurring colors. So you may see it in slightly different colors, but it has no milky sap, unlike other milkweeds. It does have short, stiff, fuzzy leaves, fuzzy stems, and these bright orange or yellow flowers. It's beautiful even in bud. Here's another one that really prefers good drainage to a wet location. I think this is maybe my favorite milkweed picture, simply the butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, about to come into bloom. One day I'm going to paint Easter eggs just like those buds. There's a few more pictures of this plant simply because I really like it and I think it's beautiful. Gardeners go nuts for this plant because it is so pretty and it is pretty easy to grow in a garden setting. However, it's not usually a monarch's first choice. Sometimes it is. Monarchs test the plants they're going to use for their chemical content before they lay eggs. And in anybody's, particular garden, this might be their first choice. Usually they prefer one of the others. Another milkweed that's native to your area and all the way up here into North Texas and to the west is the side cluster, or Yerba de Zizotes, and please forgive my accent, Asclepias inothyroides. Its leaves are variable. They can be rather thin or they can be wider. They're frequently ruffled along the edges. And when it's not blooming, it's a pretty insignificant looking plant that you might walk right by. Kip Kiphart, who is a very well-known Monarch Watch conservation specialist, now retired from that, said he walked his dog up and down that same driveway for years and years and years, and suddenly one year there was a large milkweed like this in full bloom. Somehow he missed it when it wasn't in bloom. Jerry, your mic's open again. Here's a close-up of that flower. Really unusual individual flowers with the petals reflexed backwards and long hoods that stand up above that center. Another one of my favorite milkweeds to grow in a garden is the Texas milkweed. It's an endemic milkweed found only in Texas, found only in a small region of Texas, but it's well suited to gardens in larger areas of the state. Did extremely well here in North Texas. Swamp milkweed is another one that's very adaptable to a broader range, and it is found naturally in Texas. Its natural color is mostly pink. It's very attractive to all kinds of wildlife, small wildlife. And it also comes now in new cultivars in different colors. These still seem to attract the native bees to nectar from them. And they're okay for the monarchs. It doesn't seem to affect their usefulness at all that this is white. I think there's another one called Cinderella. Green flowered milkweed is one that's really beautiful. So I wanted you to see it. And it actually has a really big range. This one goes all the way out to Arizona, and it goes up to Connecticut in the north, and all the way through the midsection of the country too. I had no idea its range was so big until this week when I looked it up. But Asclepias viridiflora, sometimes called green flowered milkweed, sometimes comet milkweed, green comet milkweed, or also side cluster. So common names aren't all that useful. They really vary throughout the country and when you're talking to different people. I encourage you to get used to using the Latin names, which I haven't been so good at tonight. It's a really strange plant. The actual veins on the leaves stick out on the top of the leaf and not on the bottom. And the flower clusters are hanging down. So the whole plant looks like it's been assembled upside down. I've actually sent pictures off for publication, only to find that they published them upside down. Here's another couple of views of that. It's called green flowered milkweed, but frequently the hoods on these are quite purple. And a lot of times the hoods are striped white and purple or green and purple. So it's really fun to see all the different color variations on this. The pods, although the stems are fuzzy, the pods are quite smooth. They're kind of interesting. There's a milkweed you might have passed by and not recognized as a milkweed because it is so dainty. It is so slim-leaved that it's easy to walk right past it in its natural setting. It's whorled milkweed. It's called whorled because it has 3 or more leaves at a node. And so that's a whorl when you have a go-round of leaves at a node. The flowers are white and they have sort of a little neck between the business part of the flower and the petals that come up like a little skirt that flips up. It's found through a lot of Texas, and it can be either really dense and bushy or kind of open and airy, so that look can be a little bit deceiving. It's actually beloved by a lot of creatures other than monarchs. You might think with such lacy foliage, it's not going to be good for monarchs. But this isn't a taproot species. This is one that sort of runs sideways and forms a colony of itself. So when the monarch has eaten that one stem all the way down, it can simply walk next door and eat the next one. And so it is good for monarchs, and studies have shown that they like it quite well as a host plant. But so do all these other interesting creatures enjoy it. There's a really odd beetle, I think, to the left. The Delta beetle on the right, the Delta flower scarab, quite beautiful and frequently found on whorled milkweed. My lower left picture was several variegated fritillaries, and I could only get 3 in the picture, but 5 were fighting for space on this little whorled milkweed. You can see how hidden it is down in the grass, but that is what they wanted that day. And all kinds of other beetles and bees will use this. There are the seed pods. They can be a little bit thicker or a little bit slimmer. All right, I have just a couple more milkweeds that aren't really milkweeds per se. They're extremely close relatives. So the mantra is monarchs need milkweeds. And that's the simplified version. The truth is that monarchs can use milkweeds and some, but not all, of their extremely close plant relatives. So one of the ones that we know larger monarch caterpillars can use is the twin-flowered milkvine. There's not really any data on whether the smaller caterpillars can use this. To my knowledge, nobody's ever found eggs on it, but larger caterpillars will sometimes self-relocate to this plant. Barbara Wright observed that in her nursery and forwarded that information to me. Another one that we know they use, they lay eggs and they will consume quite readily, is the honey vine or blue vine or sand milk vine, Cynantium laeva. This one is a rambunctious vine, to say the least. If you invite it home, you might regret that because it does spread quite readily and can take over a large area and be very hard to eradicate. This is not a taproot species. It will come up from underground all over the place. And another one, the anglepod milkvine. I'm not sure if it's native to the hill country, but I left this in because the pod is so interesting. If you find one of these, you'll know what it is. It looks like a milkweed pod, but it has 4 perpendicular flanges that stick out from each pod like that. So those are the angles, hence the anglepod milkvine. What don't I recommend? I do not recommend that you plant tropical milkweed, also called Mexican milkweed or Mexican butterfly weed. And I put this in so we could talk about how to tell the difference. Our butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, if it is two-toned, will have the red in the center and the yellow on the outside. This one is backwards. This one also has smooth leaves, smooth stems. It's hairless. And our native butterfly weed that looks similar has hairy stems, hairy buds, hairy leaves. So if you see one that's absolutely smooth in the nursery and you are looking at that label and it says this is Asclepias tuberosa, it probably is not. It is probably a mislabeled tropical milkweed, and unfortunately that is rampant in the nursery industry. I'm not going to ascribe malice to those growers. I think sometimes it's an honest mistake, but it's a mistake that's being made too often, so you have to watch out. Most importantly, if you are purchasing milkweeds or anything that you expect a caterpillar to eat, ask every time
You know
you
how
go
long
to
this lasts?
about an hour, and your microphone's live. Okay, so anyway, you need to ask and you need to keep asking. So the nurseries understand that we need pesticide-free host plants for butterfly gardens. Now, don't ask, have you sprayed this? They can probably truthfully answer no, even if they know Melissa sprayed it. Don't ask if they sprayed it. A lot of times things are not treated at the nurseries. They are treated at the growers, and that's a different animal. So they can truthfully answer, no, we haven't put anything on it. What you want to ask is, has it been treated with any insecticides? That's a question that takes into account the entire sales chain. Okay, so I'm ready to take questions on milkweeds briefly, and then we're going to hit our 2 last sections.
Okay, Carol, we have 2 questions and I'll just combine them. This is a good question. If you're planting a garden with milkweeds, is there sort of a formula for how many milkweeds per square foot or something in terms of attraction? And
Great
then also,
question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And then also, do all milkweed plants attract the milkweed bugs and the aphids, the things that are often thought of as
Yes.
pests?
Yeah, I'll answer the aphids first. Yes, they love all of our milkweeds. And so it's a problem for all of those. Are orange aphids that are imported, oleander aphids. They're not native to Texas. So if you want to squish them, you'd be my guest. But just be careful not to squish any caterpillars. Now, the second question, what's the formula for an effective monarch garden? We recommend a 4-to-1 to 6-to-1 ratio of nectar plants to milkweeds in your garden. And I personally recommend not grouping your milkweeds into one solid block. There have been reports from close friends of mine who grew milkweeds in an increased bed, and they watched a pair of wasps come and methodically check every milkweed in that rectangular bed for caterpillars, and they took them all away. So you want to make it harder for the predators to be efficient and effective at finding your caterpillars. All right.
Great
Yeah.
answers, and we'll carry on to the next section.
Okay. So nectar plants. So, and this is kind of a Franken talk where a lot of different talks have been squished together, and hopefully we'll finish on time. The main goal for your nectar plants is to have things blooming that provide nectar at all times when monarchs are going to be in Texas. And again, that's not the summer. That is in the spring and the fall. So if we use a succession of blooming plants, we can accomplish that easily. So don't want just one kind. We want to give them some choices. If you invest in diversity, you will always do better with the pollinators. You might want several of each kind of plants to attract them, but have a lot of different plants. Milkweeds themselves are excellent nectar plants, but a large fraction of your other nectar plants will be naturally composites. They make up a lot of our Texas plants, and they're very effective for a lot of our pollinators. Other high-value plants might be flowers, simple flowers that are congested into a single flower head, things like buttonbush and aringo, rattlesnake master, verbenas, lantanas, salvias. When using flowers from other parts of the country, you also want to remember their heat tolerance and their drought tolerance, not just their cold tolerance, which tends to show up on the nursery labels. Sometimes the heat tolerance is not there. And use natives whenever you can. We're going to blast through a bunch of great nectar plants for monarchs. Buttonbush is one that I highly recommend. It's not just for them. It's for everybody else too. Many pollinators will show up on your buttonbush. There's an American bumblebee, an American lady, and a Southern Plains bumblebee, one of our less known bumblebees. A purple coneflower. Now, honestly, with the drought situation, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this one to you because this is native much closer to Arkansas. But how about one like this that's more drought tolerant, our narrowleaf coneflower, or whichever coneflower is local to your area. Coneflowers are wildly attractive to a whole array of butterflies and beetles and bees. So they do more than monarch duty in your landscape. These are my narrowleaf coneflowers, and I got to tell you, if I stick a trowel in this soil, there is rock about 4 inches under. And this is a sandy, well-drained, horrid soil, and yet the narrowleaf coneflowers are perfectly at home there. It's a whole batch of butterflies all facing into the wind. Oh, I tried to take this one out. This is actually not a great nectar plant. Ignore that one. Eringo, I must have failed. I'm not sure which version of the slideshow I'm actually showing at that point. Okay, so Eringo is a good nectar plant. This is a fall blooming plant. It's an annual, and it's largely been eradicated from our landscapes because of those very pointy pieces on it. Those bracts and those little things up top are just so sharp that they can poke cattle in the eyes, and ranchers were quick to get rid of it wherever they could. So you're going to have to look to find this one these days. But when you do, you'll find pollinators using it. The structure is quite interesting. It would be an interesting accent plant in a flower bed as long as it's not close to a pathway because it is sharp. But just look at what's going on this Eringo. We've got a praying mantis and a carpenter bee and a honeybee, and the praying mantis will always show up on the Eringo because the pollinators are going to be there in large numbers. Gregg's blue mistflower is one of the staples of Texas butterfly gardens, and it's easy to see why when you see it in action. This is actually this tiny strip between my alleyway and my fence, and this was a good monarch year in 2015, but they really adore this plant. They're actually genetically programmed to crave what this plant has. They and their cousins, the queen butterflies, need a chemical from this. The queens actually need it for breeding success, and the monarchs still think they do, but they don't actually use it in the same way. And here is that Gregg's blue mist flower in Mr. McDowell's garden. Late flowering boneset. You know, when I took that disaster tour of the drought areas up here this weekend, this was one of the 2 things that were still trying to bloom. And it looked like it might actually pull it off. So a very important fall nectar plant for a lot of species. It also smells like baby powder. How can you beat that? A relative of that one, shrubby boneset. This one is also a great pollinator plant, as evidenced by this photo that Bill Ward took and lent to me. A really great bush. And this one is actually sort of a woody shrub. It's a perennial. It's well behaved. It looks fantastic. And you can visit this on one of the southbound Monarch way stations on I-35 to get a look at that. One of my favorites is this one, the prairie verbena, partly because it's just so darn tough. I once transplanted one from under a swing set in a compacted area of a public park in July because it was just being trampled over and over, and it lived and did that. It bloomed very well. So this one is really hard to beat, and it may start blooming as early as March and bloom all the way to November in a year when we have rain. So close up, and that is what that ragged monarch in McKinney, Texas was using up here above Dallas. Annual sunflowers can be good nectar sources for monarchs, but stay away from the heavily hybridized ones. Things like the teddy bear sunflower may not offer nectar anymore. Maximilian sunflower, fantastic fall nectar source. And if you're wondering how long this is going to go, these are in alphabetical Latin order, and we're almost halfway through the alphabet. So we've got a Helianthus here, Maximiliani, a great plant, except it can be a little aggressive, so you want to be careful where you plant that. Sawtooth sunflower. I had to write that this gets huge. It really does. If you're not counting on a 12 to 18 foot tall plant, you might not want to put this in a place where it gets plenty of water. Lantana, we have a native lantana, Lantana urticoides, which is that the one? Yeah, they keep changing the name and rearranging this genus, but I believe it's urticoides at present. And it's really great for monarchs, but there are a lot of lookalikes in the nursery trade. The lookalikes have smaller teeth on the leaves. The native has large teeth. This may be one of the lookalikes. I'm not positive on this one. And so you want to look for the native when you can. The non-native tends to escape captivity and cause some issues in public spaces where it shouldn't be. Another one of my favorite plants is our prairie gay feather, Liatris mucronata. You may have other Liatris where you are, and they're all great, but they may bloom at different times of the year. This one in particular blooms just when the monarchs come through in North Texas. It may do that in your region as well. It's worth checking into if it does, because this is a reliable bloomer since it has, again, a storage organ under the ground that holds carbohydrates and moisture. This is growing in lousy, rocky, sandy soil at my farm, gets no supplemental water at all, and puts on this kind of show. Turk's cap, here's one that is also pretty dependable and tough as nails. It's hard to kill a Turk's cap once you get it established. It will take full sun, full shade, everything in between, and it will bloom during the hottest part of the year. And monarchs do use this. You can see that one using that to nectar right there. It also has a cool added benefit of making fruits that some of the birds will eat. Pitcher sage, Salvia azurea, one of our later blooming salvias, and the monarchs do love that. Mealy blue sage is one probably most of you have seen, and this is a big favorite of all kinds of pollinators. The monarchs are no exception. It's easy to grow, and some of the cultivars of our native mealy blue sage are actually quite good for pollinators and seem to produce a fair amount of nectar. Studies that measure the quantity and quality of nectar are almost impossible to conduct. There are too many variables. Even the time of day makes a big difference. The weather makes a big difference. And so it's very difficult to come up with definitive data on nectar quality. But the Henry Dulberg is one that does perform well. Okay, so goldenrod, oh boy, all kinds of goldenrods are really great for monarchs, particularly the ones that bloom a little bit later and are in bloom when they come through. This is a first-year plant in my home landscape, and I thought, oh, isn't that cute? It's going to be great. And it was about 2 feet tall, and it was well behaved. And the following year, I had it everywhere, and it was 5 feet tall. But it does pull out easily, this tall goldenrod, and it does do this. So I let it stay, and I just pull out excess plants and give them away or throw them away. This is another one of the plants that was actually looking like it's going to bloom during that awful tour of the parched landscapes. This one is still doing okay. It hasn't dried out at the tops, and I think it may bloom. The other thing that was actually blooming this weekend was the shiny goldenrod, and it's just beginning to bloom. At my farm, this is in sandy soil. I haven't really seen it too many places in the wild, but when I see it, it is covered with pollinators, and it attracts a wide variety of them. So I'm happy with that. I'm glad to let it do its thing. It has spread quite a bit on my landscape up at the farm, but its purpose is to be a wildlife haven, and this plant does that job about as well as any. Fall asters, we're all the way up to the S's, so stay awake and hang in there because we're getting to milkweed propagation pretty quickly. This is a great plant for all kinds of native pollinators. It's also really pretty, really well behaved in your landscape. But we also have some taller asters. So this one is Aster oblongifolius. Some of the taller ones might be Aster praetum, or it used to be Aster praetum. Now it's Symphyotrichum praealtus. And so anything with the name fall aster is probably going to do pretty well for you. One thing people don't realize about asters is that those petals aren't petals, they're individual flowers. So it's possible for them to be eaten or gone. and the plant still to be producing nectar inside those flower heads in the center. And this was taken November 3rd. And there were, I've lost count, but there was something like 6 butterflies, 2 beetles, and some flies, and a moth in this picture. Mexican sunflower. This is not a native, but it is one of the cheats that butterfly gardeners use a lot because it is reliable. It is an annual, and I've never heard of it escaping. So it's just one of those cheats. It's very tall. Texas vervain. We're up to V's. Hang in there, folks. This is a plant that blooms in the spring, and it is blooming when monarchs come through in that early spring period, when sometimes if we've had a slow spring, there's not a whole lot else blooming. They will use it for nectar, as will other butterflies. So if you can get your hands on this one, I'd encourage adding it to your landscape. And there it is. It's airy. You'll need to combine it with some other things. Cowpen daisy. This one is a fall and late summer and fall winter for all kinds of pollinators. This is Kathy Downs's picture, and she has lent that to me for use. I didn't have a good one until recently. I need to put my own in there, I guess. Another fall plant that's very dependable is frostweed. This will grow in the sun or in the shade. Down in your region, I think it would prefer some shade, but it blooms when the monarchs are coming through in the fall and makes it valuable for them. I think that's also Kathy Downs's photo. I haven't seen that many at once in my landscape yet. Other butterflies, honeybees, and other native bees will use this plant as well. It's very easy to grow and it will spread. It also does some neat things when we get a short, sharp freeze. It goes from being kind of warm to suddenly very cold. Those stems can freeze, break open, and emit a fluid that freezes in exotic curlicues. Kind of fun. It looks like your yard has been toilet papered. I also like Zexmania. I haven't seen monarchs use it quite as heavily as some of the other plants, but it is fantastic for native bees, and the monarchs will use it. Last couple plants, we do have some native zinnias in Texas. They occur to the west, and they are plants that like it hot and dry and well drained. So my other big cheat is to use a commercially available garden zinnia, which has been based on Zinnia elegans. The simpler forms retain really good nectar quality. And I know this is a Native Plant Society. I'm probably not even supposed to show you this plant. But if you are putting in a public garden and it needs public acceptance in a hurry, it is hard to beat a cheap packet of zinnia seeds to get almost instant color out there and instant nectar for your pollinators. So if you can't do anything else this fall about keeping your plants alive, maybe find yourself a pot full of zinnias to keep out and watered for the monarchs. That's a little decorator looper there that has put my salvia buds all over his back, and he's not doing camouflage very well. Again, choose those open-centered zinnias. The big double forms are not your best. Okay, so I have overrun my time, and it's up to you whether you want to see 5 quick slides on milkweed propagation or whether we should quit there.
I think everyone will be interested in propagating milkweeds if you have the time. And you've been so good about moving quickly, so I say go forward.
I have the time if you have the willpower, so we'll do that. And this is going to be fast. I condensed this to as small as possible. Now this program is being recorded, so you can go back and visit these slides later and write down the pertinent information for yourself. And that's one of the reasons I skipped a lot of the names. You can come back and see them later. All right, propagating milkweed. First, you've got to start with fully ripe seeds. Don't even think about plucking off a milkweed pod that does not have brown seeds inside. One way to tell if they are ready is to press on the seam that you see there with your thumb and your forefinger. If it makes a popping sound and comes open just a little bit, it is probably right. And then within a few hours to a day, it's going to open wide like that one in the front, and you'll see brown seeds inside. If those seeds are green or yellow, they are not ripe. They're not fully formed. You want to start with seed that doesn't have holes in it and hasn't been chewed. If you store it in a garage, it's likely to find the seed bugs of all kinds are likely to find that, and they will chew it up and render it unviable. So you want to keep it indoors at household temperatures if you can, and in a dry location. So good seed is critical. And here's the critical bit. The first step is to soak your seeds overnight in plain water. This can be tap water, it doesn't matter. Then you're going to make sterile vermiculite with water until it is thoroughly moist. You want it saturated, but you don't want it so wet that there is water puddling all around it. And then you're going to add your soaked seeds. I do this in a Ziploc bag. An ordinary quart size freezer bag is good because they're kind of sturdy. The next thing you're going to do is put that in your refrigerator for at least 30 days. This can be in, a little bit of Tupperware container, a reusable container, or your Ziploc bag. Do not expect the seeds to sprout in the refrigerator. They will not sprout until you take them out and warm them up. After that 30 days of cold, moist stratification is done, you take out the whole bag or little container, you open it up. I pump it a few times to get some air circulation in there, and then I leave it open sideways on my counter so that you can get some air in there, but you can monitor that for moisture. You're going to need to keep it moist. You might need to add a little bit more water after a couple days. In about 10 days, you're going to see your seeds start to sprout. And at that point, they can be planted immediately, or you can hold them until they have a set of leaves. So for handling your seedlings, you're going to very carefully, one at a time, tease them out with your fingers or a soft pair of tweezers or a chopstick, something where you're not roughing them up. And you take them out one at a time because those roots will dry out and you don't want that to happen. And then you're going to put them in a deep container with a wet soil mix that contains mycorrhizal fungi. And I did not put the word wet in there, but it should be there because this needs to be quite damp so the root will stay damp. You're going to keep that soil moist but not soggy for your young seedlings. And then you're going to transplant them to their permanent home anytime after the first 4 months. Some milkweed experts recommend holding them for at least a year, and that is fine, but realize that they're going to have big, long taproots, so you need a deep container for these plants. Okay, so I am going to wrap it up there, and I just hope that all your weeds turn out to be wildflowers. And I'll take questions now. I see things flipping by in the chat, but I haven't had time to look at them.
Thank you, Carol. That was a tremendous amount of information and a very quick presentation. So thank you so much. Two more great planting questions. One sort of other side of propagation, and I think we talked about this earlier today, was attempting to transplant antelope horns specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is another great question about creating a pollinator garden. Do you or does Monarch Watch have a garden plan for a small garden that creates that succession of nectar plants throughout the year?
I do not, and I've struggled with this. I'd actually love for each chapter to create one or two of those for their region that feature plants that work well there. I know that when I go to the wildflower.org website and I look at the bloom time, it's off for my region. And so local knowledge is really important to get that right. And I know you have people in your chapter that are experienced enough to help out with that.
Okay, great.
So,
And then any tips on transplanting actual mature antelope corn milkweed?
I do have some, but I only recommend that if the bulldozers are really running.
Yeah.
You do not want to do this for fun. You do not want to do this for success. You only want to do that if that plant is in imminent danger of being permanently destroyed. If you're telling me they're going to mow it, that's not a good reason to take it out of the wild. If you're telling me the sign went up, a shopping center is coming to this corner, it's going to be bulldozed, that's a different story and it's worth trying. So some of our milkweeds come up at an angle. When they reach the soil surface, they go a little bit sideways and then show up. Antelope horns kind of emerges all around. So you want to get kind of locate the center of that circle. And it is one plant, but you're going to have, branches that go in all directions. A green milkweed comes up from a root that's over here. You'll see the plant over here. So you want to follow that backwards and dig over here. Antelope horns, I think, is more centered. And you're going to need a shovel and a strong back because it will go right through cracks in your white chalk and keep going. It can have a very long taproot, 20 inches or so, and it's brittle. So that taproot is probably going to break. Now, once you've broken it, don't give up. See if you can still get the other pieces out of there. And definitely take it home and wrap all the leafy parts and all the flower parts, if there are any, in damp cloth and keep it in the shade. And you're going to wrap the root in damp cloth too, except for the very end. You want that to form a callus and seal off, which it will do in a couple of days. When that's nice and dry, it's no longer oozing anything, then your milkweed is ready to plant. Expect it to go dormant immediately. It's going to hate being transplanted and it will sulk. But if it has enough taproot, it will come back up. I hesitate to even mention it, but take your broken pieces that were still under that plant and you didn't manage to get out whole and plant them too and see what happens.
That's great advice. Yeah, if you have them, you might as well plant them and see what happens.
Yeah. I have had some success with broken pieces before.
There is a question about I'm just gonna ask you the question because it involves do milkweeds need ecto or endo mycorrhizae?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think when you buy a bag of mycorrhizal fungi containing product, they're mixed anyway. So I think I just go with some of these products, and I'm going to advance my slide one slide so you can see some of the mycorrhizal brands I recommend. Premix BX has been well studied and does really well for these milkweeds. They get bigger and beefier in a hurry than they do in ordinary potting soil. Happy Frog has had some good reports. There's a liquid supplement called Orca that has gotten good reviews, and Dr. Earth. But Dr. Earth has chicken feathers in it, so may attract unwanted wildlife attention.
And there's one more question, and then I think.
I think we've already gotten everybody past their bedtime.
Yeah, well, there's that as well. And it may be the mycorrhizal. There's sort of a question about why is the tropical milkweed so easy to propagate and spread so quickly? The natives are so difficult. And
so difficult, yeah. So milkweeds are easy to germinate. They're not easy to get from the first day they germinate to day 90. To do that, you have to be attentive, give them bright light, very bright light, and keep them moist. If the young seedlings dry out, they die. If they are staying too wet and don't have air circulation, they damp off. So you need to have good air circulation, but not let them dry all the way out, which just requires some attention and detail. But tropical milkweed grows easily from cuttings. So it's super easy for a grower just to whack one into bits, plant all the pieces, and very quickly have new milkweeds. It grows quickly and it's super cheap to propagate.
Okay, that's a great answer. Well, thank you very much, Carol, for sharing your knowledge with us this evening. And as Carol mentioned, we will be, it has been recorded and we will be sharing the presentation with you. And thank you for joining us. We are going to have a brief business meeting now, if you are interested in hearing some goings on of the Hill Country chapter. And again, Carol, thank you very much. We look forward to having much more successful Monarch gardens going forward.
Well, and I really hope you all do for the Monarch's sake. So thanks for being here and thanks for being patient. When you asked for that many topics, I thought, oh no, we're not going to make it.
Yeah,
But we stepped it in somehow. Okay, bye.
All that practice